The woman's voice had been steady for 90 minutes, reading names from ledgers older than her grandmother, when the first tear struck the Vampire King's breastplate and ran down the engraved silver like a crack in the world. Wren Zeller did not notice. She had 1,140 names yet to read, and the two vampire delegations seated across from each other in the bombed cathedral's vault had not moved or spoken since she began. Her family had kept this record for 6 generations, adding names in careful ink every time a human died in the crossfire of a war whose cause no living person could clearly explain. Grocers, teachers, a child of 4, 2 nuns, a lamplighter. She read them all, her voice filling the underground space that smelled of old stone and the faint electric hum of the metro tunnels overhead. The cathedral had been rebuilt twice, buried once by choice during the last human-vampire treaty attempt in 1887, and bombed during the mortal world wars that the vampires had largely ignored. Now it sat beneath the subway lines, accessible only through a maintenance corridor that the city's transportation authority believed led to a disused storage chamber. Wren had used her archivist credentials to access it 3 months ago, and when both houses had finally agreed to meet after 2 centuries of skirmishes, ambushes, and blood tithes that bled entire human neighborhoods dry, she had informed them that she would be attending, not as mediator, not as witness, as accountant. The vampires had ignored her letter. She had come anyway, carrying 6 leather-bound ledgers and her great-great-great-grandfather's reading glasses, which she did not need but wore because they made her feel less alone. The house of Ismail sat on the eastern side of the nave, 17 vampires in dark suits and darker expressions, their white hair gleaming in the candlelight that was the only illumination permitted under the ancient parley codes. The House of Dragon occupied the western side, 14 vampires whose pale skin seemed to drink the shadows, whose eyes tracked Wren with the patience of creatures who had learned to wait out centuries. At the head of the Ismail delegation sat Rhydion Ismail, the vampire king who had led his house for 400 years, and this particular war for 200. He wore ceremonial armor over modern dress, a concession to the old forms that parley demanded. The breastplate was silver chased with black, engraved with the names of his own dead, though Wren suspected he had stopped adding to it decades ago. There were too many. Everyone had stopped counting except her family. He had not looked away from her since she began reading. Wren turned a page, the paper whispering against her fingertips. Marcella Donati, aged 61, killed when House Dragon operatives burned a supply route through the Riverside district, April 1891. Her daughter Maria, aged 34, same incident. Thomas Wexford, aged 19, bled dry by House Ismail scouts during retaliatory raids, May 1891. Catherine Wexford, aged 17, Thomas's sister, killed attempting to retrieve his body. Her voice finally cracked. Not from exhaustion, though she was tired. Not from fear, though she could feel the weight of 31 vampiric stares and knew that several of them were imagining how easily they could silence her. The crack came because Catherine Wexford had been 17 and Wren was 23, and she had found Catherine's diary in an estate sale last year. Catherine had been studying music. She had wanted to play piano in the grand hotels. The tear fell before Wren could stop it, striking Rhydion Ismail's breastplate with a soft sound that should not have been audible across the entire cathedral vault. But it was. Every vampire heard it. Only one did not look away. Rhydion's eyes were pale, some color between silver and frost, and they fixed on Wren with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not hunger, though she had learned to recognize that too, growing up in a city where vampires and humans lived in tense coexistence, brokered by treaties that frayed more each year. Something else, something that looked almost like recognition. She wiped her face and continued reading. It took another 2 hours. The vampires did not interrupt, did not call for a recess, did not move. Wren read through thirst and a headache, and the growing knowledge that every name was a person who had wanted things, loved things, died because they had been in the wrong place when immortal pride clashed with immortal memory. When she reached the final name, David Kress, aged 41, killed 3 weeks ago when a House Dragon safe house exploded in the warehouse district and took out the building next door, she closed the ledger and looked up. 11,140, she said quietly. Those are the human dead from your war. Not from the first conflict or the treaty wars or any of the other things you fought about. Just this one, the one you've been waging for 200 years over. She paused, flipped back to the first ledger, found the notation her great-great-great-grandfather had made in 1823. Over the murder of Alexander Cain, mortal raised ward of House Ismail, killed by House Dragon operatives in Vienna. 1 death, 11,140 in return. The accounting is not balanced. The silence that followed could have smothered stars. The vampire who rose from the dragon's side was ancient, his white hair falling past his shoulders, his face sharp as a blade. Mortal, you have no standing in. She has standing. Rhydion's voice cut through the air like winter itself. He had not raised it. He did not need to. She has done what none of us have. She has counted. He stood, and the armor moved with him, silent and heavy. He was tall, as most of the old ones were, and he moved with the contained grace of something that had forgotten how to be clumsy. When he crossed the nave toward Wren, 3 of his own house shifted as if to follow, but he gestured once, and they subsided. He stopped an arm's length from her, close enough that she could see the engraving on his breastplate was not just names but dates, places, causes, a record worn against his heart. "May I see the ledgers?" he asked. His courtesy was unexpected. Wren had planned for threats, dismissal, perhaps violence. She had not planned for a vampire king to ask permission. She handed him the top ledger, and he opened it with care that surprised her further. His fingers, pale and long and tipped with nails that could tear flesh, turned pages as gently as a scholar's. He read in silence, and Wren watched his face, trying to understand the expression that moved across it like shadows on water. "You keep cause of death," he said finally. "Attribution, method. My family believes in thorough records. Your family is archivist trained? For 8 generations, we worked for the Treaty Council until it dissolved in 1903. After that, we kept the books because someone had to." He looked at her then, and for the first time, Wren saw something in a vampire's face that she had not expected to find. Respect. "I would like to see all of them," he said. "The ledgers, and whatever records your family has kept of this war. Not now, not here, but soon." "Why?" The question seemed to surprise him. Perhaps no one had asked him why in a very long time. "Because I do not remember what we are fighting for," he said quietly. "I remember that we began. I remember Alexander's body and the rage and the certainty. But I do not remember when I last questioned whether the certainty was true." From across the nave, the dragon elder spoke again. "Rhydion, this is not the purpose of parley. The mortal has no—" "The mortal," Rhydion said, still looking at Wren, "has 11,140 reasons to interrupt our parley. She may have 11,000 more before we finish. Unless we stop." The word hung in the air like a foreign language. Stop. Wren stared at him. "You fought this war for 200 years. Yes. Your people have died. Theirs have died. Humans have died in numbers I just spent 3 hours reciting. Yes. And you're suggesting you stop because I cried on your armor?" Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth, there and gone like a ghost. "I am suggesting I stop because you counted when we did not, because you remembered their names when we forgot to ask them, because you are 23 years old and you have spent your life tallying a debt that neither house has acknowledged, and when you stood in a room of creatures who could kill you without effort, you did not ask for mercy or justice, you simply read the numbers." He closed the ledger and handed it back to her. "I will propose a ceasefire while I review your family's records," he said. "House Dragon will refuse. They believe they are winning. But I will propose it nonetheless, and I will enforce it within my own territory regardless of their answer. That's not how ceasefires work. No, but it is how stopping begins." He turned back to his delegation, and Wren stood clutching her ledgers and trying to understand what had just happened. Around her, the parley dissolved into argument as the dragon elder protested, and Rhydion's second, a sharp-faced woman with hair like spun glass, demanded to know if the king had lost his mind. Rhydion himself said little. He simply repeated his proposal, named the terms, and when the dragon delegation rejected it with the scorn he had clearly anticipated, he gathered his people and left. At the door, he paused and looked back at Wren. "My estate is in the old district, beneath the Historical Society building. Bring the ledgers tomorrow at sunset. I will have safe passage arranged." Then he was gone, and Wren was alone in a bombed cathedral with her family's life work and the creeping suspicion that she had just altered the course of a war by doing nothing more complicated than her job. She went home to her apartment, a small place near the university where she worked as a research archivist during daylight hours, and did not sleep. Instead, she pulled out the correspondence files, the ones her great-great-great-grandfather had started and each generation had maintained, letters to both houses requesting access to their war records, formal inquiries about ceasefire terms, proposals for third-party mediation, 200 years of careful, professional attempts to stop the bleeding, all of them ignored, until tonight. She had not expected the Vampire King to be reasonable. She had not expected him to listen. She had certainly not expected him to care that she had cried. But he had noticed. In a room full of immortals who had learned to look away from human grief, he had been the only one who watched. Wren dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing practical clothes that would not restrict movement if she needed to run, and carrying the ledgers in the reinforced case her grandmother had commissioned. The Historical Society building was a gray stone structure that hunched between modern glass towers like a remnant of another world, which in many ways it was. The society itself was a human organization, though everyone knew it was funded by vampire interests. The preservation of history served those who had lived through it. The safe passage came in the form of a vampire named Seraphine, tall and composed, who met Wren at the building's public entrance and led her down through corridors that transitioned from museum clean to old stone ancient, past doors that required keys no human locksmith had forged. "The king has cleared his evening schedule for you," Seraphine said as they descended a staircase that spiraled down into bedrock. "He asks that you be patient with him. He has not reviewed primary sources in some time." "How long is some time?" 60 years, perhaps. He has generals for that. The staircase opened into a space that stole Wren's breath. It was a library, but not in any modern sense. The room was vast, carved from living rock, its ceiling lost in shadow 30 feet above. Shelves lined every wall, filled with books and scrolls and bound manuscripts that ranged from leather and vellum ancient to acid-free paper recent. Tables of dark wood stood in neat rows, each with its own lamp. The scent was old paper and stone and something else, something that reminded Wren of winter nights. Rhydion stood at one of the tables, the armor gone, replaced by dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was jarringly informal, and it made him look less like a king and more like a scholar who had lost track of time. He looked up when she entered, and the smile was brief, but genuine. "Miss Zeller, thank you for coming." Wren set the case on the table and opened it, revealing the 6 ledgers and the correspondence files beneath. "I brought everything that pertains to the war's human cost. My family has other records, property damage, economic impact, refugee movements, but I thought we should start with the dead. A reasonable beginning." He gestured to a chair across from him. "May I offer you anything? Tea? Water? I keep human refreshments for mortal scholars who consult the collection." "Water would be good." He signaled to Seraphine, who left and returned within moments carrying a tray with a glass carafe of water, a cup, and what looked like a small plate of cookies. Wren tried not to stare at the cookies. "My housekeeper insists," Rhydion said, catching her expression. "She believes all guests should be fed, regardless of whether I personally require food." "You have a housekeeper?" "I have a staff of 14, all human, all paid above market rates with full benefits and a pension plan that will support them and their families for 3 generations. I have employed mortal staff for 200 years, Miss Zeller. The war has never been with humanity itself." He said it simply, as fact, but Wren heard the undercurrent. An explanation he should not have needed to make, offered anyway. She poured water and took one of the cookies shortbread. Perfect, and opened the first ledger. Where would you like to begin? The beginning, Alexander's death. Wren turned pages, found the entry. August 3rd, 1823, Alexander Kane, age 24, found dead in his Vienna apartments. Cause of death, exsanguination. Attribution, house dragon. Per testimony of House Ismail operatives who reported dragon hunters seen in the district that week. Rhydion's face did not change, but something in his stillness shifted. May I see it? She turned the ledger toward him. He read in silence, his pale eyes tracking across her great-great-great-grandfather's careful script. Your ancestor was thorough. He was a Treaty Council archivist. Thoroughness was the profession. He notes that he did not personally examine the body. No. By the time the council heard about the death, Alexander had been buried per House Ismail rights. My ancestor based his entry on the official reports filed by both houses. Do you have those reports? Wren pulled the correspondence file, found the relevant documents. 2 letters, one from House Ismail's then seneschal, one from House Dragan's elder council. The Ismail letter described the discovery of the body, the evidence of Dragan involvement, the demand for justice. The Dragan letter denied all knowledge and accused House Ismail of fabricating the incident to justify territorial expansion. Rhydion read both letters twice. I wrote the letter demanding justice, he said quietly. I remember writing it. I remember the rage. Alexander was... He paused, and for a moment he looked like someone much younger than 400 years. He was my brother in all ways that mattered. I found him when he was 6 years old, starving in a workhouse fire. I raised him, taught him, loved him. When he died, I wanted the world to burn. It nearly did. Yes. He set the letters down. Miss Zeller, I would like to hire you. Wren blinked. I'm sorry? I would like to hire you as an independent archivist to review the war records of both houses and provide a complete accounting, not just human casualties, everything. Incidents, evidence, attributed causes, outcomes. I want to know what happened, and I do not trust my own people to tell me. They have been fighting too long. They believe the story we have told ourselves. What story is that? That House Dragan killed my brother and must be destroyed. That every death since has been justice, or necessity, or the price of honor. That stopping would dishonor Alexander's memory. He met her eyes. Your ledgers suggest a different story. They suggest that whatever we have been doing for 200 years, it has not been justice. Wren's heart was beating too fast. You understand that if I do this, I will need access to sealed records, private correspondence, evidence that both houses have kept classified. I will give you access to everything House Ismail holds. I cannot speak for House Dragan, but I can ask. They'll refuse. Probably, but I can still ask. He leaned back in his chair, and the movement was pure, exhausted grace. I have fought this war for 2 centuries, Miss Zeller. I have killed for it. I have sent people I cared for to die for it. And last night, when you read those names, I realized I could not remember the last time I questioned whether Alexander's death meant what I believed it meant. What do you believe it meant? Betrayal, murder, an act of war that required response. And now? He was quiet for a long moment. Now I believe I should have asked more questions in 1823. Wren took a slow breath. If I find that House Dragan did kill him, that the evidence supports everything you've believed, what then? Then I will know. And I will decide whether 200 years of war has been adequate response to one murder, no matter how painful. And if I find that they didn't? His smile was soft and bleak. Then I will have 11,140 deaths to account for. Wren looked at him, this vampire king who wore his age like a mantle and his doubt like a fresh wound, and made a decision that her family would probably consider either brilliant or suicidal. I'll do it, but I have conditions. Name them. First, I work independently, no oversight from either house, no one reviewing my findings before I'm ready to present them. Second, I need a formal guarantee of safety, not just for me, but for my work. If something happens to me, the records go to a neutral third party I'll name. Third, I'm paid regardless of what I find. This isn't contingent on me telling you what you want to hear. Agreed to all three. What is your rate? Wren named a number that would let her take a leave from the university and cover 6 months of expenses. Rhydion doubled it without blinking. The work may take longer than you expect, he said, and you may need resources, travel, consultants, additional research materials. I want you adequately compensated. He drew a piece of paper from a drawer in the table and wrote out the terms in a hand that was elegant and faintly archaic, the script of someone who had learned penmanship when it was an art. When he signed his name at the bottom, the letters seemed to gleam in the lamplight. I'll have the contract formalized and delivered to you tomorrow, he said, along with a letter of authorization that will grant you access to the House Ismail archives. They're extensive. My people have been meticulous record keepers. Meticulous enough to have kept the original evidence from Alexander's death? I hope so. If not, he paused. If not, that absence will be an answer in itself. Wren gathered the ledgers, but Rhydion stopped her with a raised hand. Miss Zeller, why did your family do this? Keep the count when no one asked you to, when no one paid you for it. She had known someone would ask eventually. She gave him the truth. Because my family believes that the dead deserve to be remembered. All of them, not just the ones whose deaths serve a narrative. She closed the ledger case. Your Alexander has had 200 years of memory. Marcella and Maria Donati got 3 lines in a newspaper and a pauper's grave. If I can give them a record that says they mattered, that they were more than collateral, then that's enough reason. Something in Rhydion's expression shifted, softened. You are nothing like I expected. What did you expect? Someone angrier, someone who would accuse and condemn. I'm an archivist, Your Majesty. I don't deal in accusations. I deal in evidence. Rhydion, he said quietly. If we are to work together, please call me Rhydion. The use of his name felt intimate in a way Wren had not anticipated. She nodded, picked up her case, and let Seraphine escort her back to the surface. She did not see him watching her leave, his pale eyes tracking her until she disappeared up the stairs, his expression that of someone who had just recognized a danger he had no interest in avoiding. The House Ismail archives occupied 3 subterranean levels beneath the Historical Society, and they were as meticulously organized as Rhydion had promised. Wren spent the first week simply mapping the collection, understanding its structure, military records on the lowest level, diplomatic correspondence on the second, personal papers and private documents on the first. Each section was catalogued in multiple languages, the early records in French and German, the later ones in English. Rhydion gave her a desk in the main reading room and unlimited access. He also gave her a research assistant, a young vampire named Lucien who was 200 years old and treated the archives with the reverence of someone who understood that history was not abstract. The king has never allowed an outsider this level of access, Lucien said on her 3rd day, bringing her a box of correspondence from 1823. It's causing some concern among the elder council. Are they worried I'll find something embarrassing? They're worried you'll find something that changes the story. And you? Lucien smiled, his fangs just visible. I think the story needs changing. I've been fighting this war since I was turned in 1834. I would like to know why. Wren opened the box and began to read. The letters were revelatory, not for what they said, but for what they revealed about the people saying it. Rhydion's correspondence from the 1820s was meticulous, formal, edged with barely contained grief. He had written to allies, to neutral houses, to the Treaty Council itself, demanding investigation, justice, action. The responses ranged from sympathetic to dismissive. No one had wanted to investigate too closely. A dead mortal ward was not worth destabilizing the fragile peace between houses. But House Dragon's responses were strange. They denied involvement, as expected, but their denials were oddly detailed, almost defensive. They listed the locations of every Dragon operative in Vienna during the week of Alexander's death. They provided witness statements, movement logs, even expense reports. It was too much information, offered too readily. Wren made notes, cross-referenced dates, and followed the thread deeper. On her 10th day, she found the first inconsistency. The House Ismail report stated that dragon hunters had been seen in Alexander's district 3 days before his death, but the dragon movement logs showed all Vienna operatives recalled to the main house 2 weeks prior for internal security review. The dates didn't match. She brought the discrepancy to Rhydion that evening. He had taken to joining her in the archives after sunset, working at his own table while she researched, answering questions when she had them, otherwise simply present. Wren had grown used to his company, the quiet focus of him, the way he moved through the space as if the books themselves were old friends. He read the documents she showed him, his face carefully neutral. Who filed the Ismail report? Wren checked. Your seneschal at the time. Victor Marcon. Victor died in 1830, killed in an ambush. By House Dragon? That was the attribution, yes. Wren tapped her pen against the table. I need to see the original investigation files, everything from the discovery of Alexander's body to the formal accusation. I'll have them brought up. The files arrived the next evening in a locked case that required Rhydion's personal seal to open. Inside were police reports, witness statements, and a single envelope marked, Private King's Eyes Only. Rhydion opened the envelope, read the contents, and went very still. What is it? Wren asked. He handed her the letter without speaking. It was addressed to Rhydion, dated August 5, 1823, written in a hand that Wren recognized from other documents as Victor Marcan's. The content was brief and devastating. My king, I have completed the private inquiry you requested. The evidence is conclusive. House Dragon operatives were responsible for your ward's death. I have secured testimony from 3 witnesses and physical evidence that places dragon hunters at the scene. The matter is now won for your justice. Your loyal servant, Victor. Wren read it twice. He's claiming you asked for a private inquiry. I did not. Rhydion's voice was flat, empty. I asked Victor to coordinate with the Treaty Council investigators. I never authorized a private inquiry. Then why would he claim you did? I do not know. But his eyes said he was beginning to suspect, and the suspicion was not one he wanted to voice. Wren spent the next 3 weeks building a timeline. She cross-referenced every document, every witness statement, every attributed sighting of House Dragon operatives. She interviewed retired Ismail soldiers, read private diaries donated to the archives by deceased members of the house, tracked down descendants of human witnesses who might have passed down family stories. The picture that emerged was damning, but not in the way Rhydion had believed for 200 years. Victor Marcon had lied, not just in the letter. In the witness statements, the evidence logs, the formal reports filed with both House Ismail and the Treaty Council. He had fabricated sightings, coerced testimony, and planted physical evidence. He had built the case against House Dragon from whole cloth, and he had done it so skillfully that no one, not even Rhydion, had thought to question it. But why? Wren found the answer in a place she had not expected: the financial records. House Ismail, like all old vampire houses, maintained meticulous accounting. Expenses, income, investments, tithes. Wren had ignored the financial archives initially, focusing on the diplomatic and military records. But when she started looking for Victor Marcon's name in the ledgers, she found a pattern. Regular payments to a third party. Large payments, starting 3 months before Alexander's death and continuing quarterly for nearly 7 years, until Victor's death in 1830. The third party was listed only as archival services. Wren's hands shook as she traced the payments forward. After Victor's death, they stopped from House Ismail. But when she cross-referenced against the captured House Dragon financial records that Rhydion had obtained during the war, she found the same payments, same amounts, same quarterly schedule, listed as information services. Both houses had been paying someone who provided services valuable enough to justify enormous sums. Someone who had a vested interest in both houses remaining at war. She took her findings to Rhydion on a cold November evening, the rain hammering against the Historical Society's windows 3 floors above. He listened without interrupting as she walked him through the evidence, the fabrications, the payments. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long time. Who received the payments? He asked finally. I don't know yet. The records just say archival services. But I have a lead. The payments were processed through a specific banking house, one that specialized in vampire accounts. I've requested access to their historical records. They'll refuse. Banks do not share client information. They will if you ask them to. You're a Vampire King, Rhydion. You have leverage. He smiled, bleak and tired. And if they still refuse? Then we find another way, but we're close. I can feel it. He looked at her then, really looked, and Wren felt something shift in the air between them. They had been working together for nearly 2 months, spending evenings in the quiet company of books and evidence and growing trust. She had learned the way he thought, methodical and precise. He had learned the way she worked, intuitive and relentless. Somewhere in those evenings, the formality between them had eroded into something easier, warmer. Dangerous, Wren's practical side whispered. He's a vampire, a king, 400 years old. But the rest of her, the part that had spent 2 months watching him question everything he had believed, watching him choose truth over certainty, did not care about danger. Wren, he said quietly, if this is what I think it is, if someone orchestrated Alexander's death to start this war, then we expose them, we end it. Ending may not be simple. Nothing about this has been simple. He laughed, a soft sound that seemed surprised out of him. No, it has not. The banking house granted access within 48 hours of Rhydion's formal request. Wren suspected the speed had less to do with his title and more to do with the specific wording of the request, which had been polite, but had carried the unmistakable implication that refusal would be remembered. The records arrived by secure courier, 3 boxes of ledgers and correspondence dating back to the early 1800s. Wren and Lucien went through them page by page while Rhydion watched, his face unreadable. They found it on the 2nd day. The account belonged to a house Wren had never heard of, House Theron. According to the banking records, Theron specialized in information brokerage and archival services. They had been in operation since the late 1700s, serving vampire houses throughout Europe. Their client list was extensive and included both House Ismail and House Dragon. Wren looked up at Rhydion. Have you ever heard of them? Yes. They maintain one of the largest private archives in the world. Scholars consult them regularly. I have used their services myself. For what? Historical research, document authentication. They're expensive but reliable. Wren's instincts prickled. When did you last use them? 30 years ago, perhaps. Why? She turned back to the ledgers, tracking the payments forward through time. The war had been profitable for House Theron, very profitable. Both houses had paid them enormous sums, not just for information services, but for something else, something listed in the ledgers as supply coordination. What supplies do vampires at war need? She asked. Rhydion's expression darkened. Blood, weapons, secure transport, safe houses. He paused. Intelligence on enemy movements. So, if someone wanted to sustain a war indefinitely, they would need to ensure both sides had access to those supplies. Yes. And if that someone was being paid by both sides to provide those supplies, they would have every incentive to ensure the war never ended. Wren sat back, the pieces falling into place. They killed Alexander. Or they arranged for it to happen. They knew it would devastate you. Knew you would demand justice. They fed Victor Marcon the false evidence, made sure it was convincing enough to justify war, but murky enough that House Dragon would refuse to accept blame. Then they sat back and profited from both sides for 200 years. Rhydion's hands were flat on the table, his knuckles white. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I know where to look. She spent the next month traveling. Rhydion arranged safe passage and sent Seraphine as a bodyguard, though Wren suspected the vampire's presence was as much about Rhydion's concern for her safety as it was about practicality. They went to Vienna first, tracking down archives that had survived both world wars and the vampire conflicts. They found records of Alexander's death, including an autopsy report that the Treaty Council had commissioned and then apparently buried. The report was clinical, thorough, and damning. Alexander had indeed been exsanguinated, but the method was wrong. The wounds were too clean, too precise, inflicted with a tool rather than fangs. The report's author, a human physician who specialized in vampire-related deaths, had concluded that the killing was staged to resemble a vampire feeding, but was almost certainly done by someone with medical training. Someone who knew vampire physiology well enough to fake it, Wren said, reading the report for the third time in the hotel room she and Seraphine were sharing. That's not common knowledge. No, Seraphine agreed, but it would be known to anyone who studied vampire history extensively, like an archivist. They found the second piece of evidence in Prague, in the private papers of a deceased Treaty Council mediator. A letter, dated 1829, from the mediator to a colleague. It described a confidential conversation with a representative from House Theron, who had offered to provide information that would help resolve the Ismail-Dragan conflict for a substantial fee. The mediator had refused and noted in the letter that he found the offer suspicious. They were trying to play both sides even then, Wren said, offering to end what they had started, probably in a way that would have made things worse. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Wren had put out inquiries through her professional network, asking if anyone had information about House Theron's activities in the 1820s. She got a response from a retired archivist in London who had worked for the Treaty Council in the 1950s. The man was elderly, his memory fragile, but he remembered a rumor. There was talk, he said, when Wren and Seraphine met him in his cluttered flat near the British Museum, that House Theron had a specialist, someone who could arrange problems. Deaths, mostly. Make them look like whatever you needed them to look like. Never proved, of course, but the rumor persisted. Do you remember the name of this specialist? The old man thought for a long moment. Victor something. Ironic that. Same name as the Ismail seneschal who died in the war. Wren's blood went cold. Victor Marquand? That's the one. Though the rumor was that the Theron operative and the Ismail seneschal were the same person, double agent, working both sides. But that was never confirmed. And then he died. And the rumor died with him. Wren and Seraphine returned to the Historical Society with a file 4 inches thick and a case that would have been called ironclad if vampires concerned themselves with mortal legal standards. Wren laid it all out for Rhydion in the library, every piece of evidence, every connection, every payment and lie and orchestrated death. He listened without moving, his face like carved marble, his eyes fixed on the documents as if he could set them on fire through will alone. Victor worked for them, he said when she finished, the entire time. Yes, I believe he was planted in your household specifically to engineer the war. Kill Alexander, fabricate the evidence, ensure you had every reason to believe House Dragon was responsible. Then he maintained the conflict by providing intelligence and supplies to both sides through House Theron. And when he died, I think he had outlived his usefulness, or he became a liability. Either way, his death removed the one person who could have directly connected House Theron to Alexander's murder. Rhydion stood, paced to the shelves, stood there with his back to her. 200 years, he said quietly. 11,140 human dead, hundreds of my own people. House Dragon's losses were similar, all of it for profit. Yes. He turned, and the expression on his face made Wren's breath catch. Not rage, though she had expected that. Something colder, more controlled. Certainty. I need to speak with House Dragon, he said. Immediately. Can you present this evidence to a neutral party if necessary? Yes. I've already arranged for copies to be held by 3 separate archives per our contract. If something happens to me or to the originals, the evidence will be released. Good. He crossed to her, stopped close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his white hair. Wren, what you have done there is no adequate thanks. You have given me the truth. That is a gift I did not know I needed. You gave me access to your archives and trusted me to use them honestly. That's rare. Trust should not be rare, but I understand why it is. He hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. When this is finished, when the war is ended and the accounting is complete, I would like to continue working with you, not as an archivist I have hired, as a partner, a colleague, someone I trust. Wren's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. I'd like that too. even knowing what I am, what I have done? You've spent 200 years fighting for someone you loved. You were lied to, manipulated, used. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who cared enough to be hurt. He smiled then, genuine and warm and utterly devastating. You are remarkable. I'm an archivist who's good at her job. You are far more than that. He left to arrange the meeting with House Dragon, and Wren sat in the library surrounded by evidence of a war that should never have happened, and tried to steady her pulse. The parley was scheduled for 3 days later, in the same bombed cathedral where Wren had first read her ledgers. Both houses agreed to attend, though House Dragon's acceptance had come with conditions and thinly veiled threats. Rhydion had accepted all of it with the calm of someone who knew he held the stronger hand. Wren arrived early, carrying the evidence in a reinforced case and trying not to show her nerves. Seraphine and Lucian flanked her, a silent honor guard that Rhydion had insisted on. The cathedral felt different now, less like a tomb and more like a space waiting to be filled with something new. The delegations arrived within minutes of each other. House Ismail filed in with the precision of a military unit, Rhydion at their head, his expression calm and his armor polished to a mirror shine. House Dragon came like a storm, their elder the same sharp-faced vampire who had protested at the first parley, leading a group that looked ready for violence. Rhydion did not wait for pleasantries. I have called this parley to present evidence that will end the war between our houses, he said, his voice carrying through the vault. Evidence gathered by an independent archivist and verified through multiple sources. I ask that you hear it before you make judgments. The dragon elder, whose name was Corvus, studied Rhydion with open suspicion. And if we find this evidence unconvincing? Then you will have made your choice, but I believe you will not. Rhydion gestured to Wren and she stepped forward. This was the moment she had prepared for, rehearsed, dreaded. She opened the case and began to speak. She presented the evidence in chronological order, building the case piece by piece. Victor Marchand's fabrications, the payments to House Theron, the autopsy report, the mediator's letter, the testimony of the retired Treaty Council archivist. She spoke clearly, without emotion, letting the facts carry the weight. The vampires listened in silence. When she reached the conclusion that House Theron had orchestrated Alexander's death and sustained the war for profit, the silence deepened into something that felt like held breath. Corvus spoke first. You are claiming that neither house was responsible for beginning this war. I am presenting evidence that suggests a third party manufactured the incident that began the war and has profited from its continuation for 2 centuries, Wren said carefully. What you conclude from that evidence is your decision. And House Theron is currently operating openly in 5 cities, including this one. They maintain their primary archive in Geneva. Corvus looked at Rhydion. You believe this? I have reviewed the evidence personally, Rhydion said. It is thorough, verified, and damning. Victor Marchand was a Theron operative. Alexander was killed to provide a cause for war. We have been manipulated for 200 years. And you expect us to simply accept this? To abandon 2 centuries of conflict because a mortal archivist has presented some documents? I expect you to review the evidence yourselves. I expect you to ask the questions I should have asked in 1823. And I expect you to consider whether continuing this war serves any purpose beyond enriching the house that started it. Corvus was silent for a long moment. Then, to Wren's surprise, he laughed. It was a bitter sound, but genuine. We have been fools, he said. Both our houses. Yes, Rhydion agreed. We have. What do you propose? A treaty. A true one, not a temporary ceasefire. We formally end hostilities, divide the contested territories equitably, and turn our attention to House Theron. You want to go to war with them. I want them held accountable for what they have done. If that requires war, so be it. But I would prefer a united legal action through the Treaty Council's successor organizations. War has cost us enough. The negotiations took 4 hours. Wren sat to one side, available to answer questions about the evidence, but otherwise simply witnessing as two vampire houses that had been trying to destroy each other for 2 centuries hammered out the terms of peace. They argued, challenged, conceded, compromised. At one point, Corvus demanded access to the original documents, and Wren provided them. He reviewed every page, occasionally asking questions, his expression growing darker as the evidence accumulated. In the end, it was not dramatic. There was no grand speech, no historic handshake. Corvus simply looked at Rhydion and said, "We agree to your terms. The war is ended." Rhydion inclined his head. "Then let us formalize it." The treaty was written out in the cathedral that night, both houses contributing language, both leaders signing. It was witnessed by Wren and 6 other vampires, 3 from each delegation. When the ink dried, Corvus extended his hand to Rhydion. "I am sorry for your ward," he said. "We did not kill him, but I am sorry nonetheless." Rhydion took the offered hand. "And I am sorry for the losses my actions have caused your house. We were both deceived. That does not absolve me of responsibility for what I have done. Nor I, but perhaps we can begin again." They released hands, and the war that had lasted 200 years ended in a bombed cathedral beneath a modern city, witnessed by the woman who had counted its cost. Afterward, when the delegations had departed and the cathedral was empty again, Rhydion found Wren standing near the altar, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "You are trembling," he said quietly. "It's over. 200 years, and it's just over. Because of you. Because you listened. Because you were willing to question what you believed." He moved closer, careful, as if approaching something fragile. "Wren, there is something I need to tell you. Something I should have said before, but I did not know if—" He paused, and the uncertainty was back, the vulnerability that made him seem less ancient and more simply present. "I have lived for 400 years. I have fought wars, ruled a house, loved and lost and continued. But I have never met anyone like you." Wren's breath caught. "Rhydion, you wept for people you had never met. You stood in a room of predators and read the names of the dead because you believed they mattered. You questioned what no one else would question, and you did not flinch from the truth even when it was painful. You are—" He stopped, and Wren saw the moment he decided to simply show her instead. He kissed her, gentle and careful, his hands coming up to frame her face as if she were something precious. The kiss was tentative, questioning, and Wren answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart racing. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am 400 years old," he said quietly. "I am a vampire, a king, and I have done things I regret. You are mortal, young, and you have your entire life ahead of you. If you tell me this is not what you want, I will accept it. But I needed you to know." Wren's hands were still twisted in his shirt. "How long have you known?" "That I loved you?" "Since the 3rd week, when you found the first discrepancy and looked at me like I had just handed you a puzzle worth solving. How long have you known?" "That I loved you." "Since you asked to see the ledgers. Since you said you had stopped counting." He smiled, and it was bright enough to light the dark cathedral. "Then we are both fools." "Probably, but I've spent 2 months watching you choose truth over pride. I think I can handle a little foolishness." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Wren thought distantly that this was a terrible idea and absolutely the right one. They left the cathedral together as the first light of dawn touched the city above. Rhydion had an hour before he needed to retreat from the sun, and they spent it walking through the empty streets, hand in hand, talking about what came next. "House Theron needs to answer for what they have done," Rhydion said, "but that will take time. Legal action through the proper channels, not war." "Do you think they'll comply?" "They will have no choice. Corvus and I will present a united front, and we have the evidence. The Treaty Council's successor organizations will have to act." "And after?" "After, I would like to open the archives. Make them available to scholars, to anyone who wants to understand our history. I have been hoarding knowledge for too long. That's a good plan. I was hoping you would help me, as the archivist in residence, if you would consider it. Wren stopped walking, tugged him to face her. Are you offering me a job or something else? Both. Either. Whatever you want. He smiled, rueful. I am accustomed to making decisions with centuries to consider. You make me want to rush. I'll take the job and the something else. Even knowing that I am what I am? Especially knowing you're a 400-year-old vampire king who ended a 200-year war because I cried on your armor. I think I can work with that. He laughed, the sound echoing off the buildings, and pulled her close. There is one more thing. You are mortal. I am not. That gap will become painful. Wren had thought about this late at night when she could not sleep, when the implications of loving someone immortal became too large to ignore. There are options. Yes, turning, but that is not a decision to make lightly, and I will not ask it of you. What if I offered? He went very still. Wren. Not now, not today, but someday, maybe. If we continue, if it grows into something that lasts, I would consider it. Not because you asked, because I choose it. You would give up mortality? I would trade one life for another. There's a difference. She touched his face, the pale skin that never flushed, the eyes that had seen centuries. But we don't have to decide now. We have time. Not as much as I would like. Then we'll use what we have well. They returned to the Historical Society as the sun rose fully, and Rhydion retreated to his private quarters. Wren went home, slept for 12 hours, and woke to find a message from Lucian inviting her to a formal dinner that House Ismail was hosting to celebrate the treaty. The dinner was elegant, formal, and filled with vampires who regarded Wren with a mix of curiosity and respect. She wore the best dress she owned and sat at Rhydion's right hand, a position of honor that did not go unnoticed. Corvus attended as well, bringing a small delegation from House Dragon, and the two houses mingled with the awkwardness of former enemies learning to be allies. Toasts were made. Wren was thanked publicly for her work, and she gave a brief speech about the importance of historical accuracy and accountability that was received with polite applause, and what she suspected was genuine appreciation from the younger vampires present. Afterward, Rhydion walked her through the mansion's private gardens, a walled space beneath the stars where night-blooming flowers filled the air with perfume. "My people approve of you," he said. "That is not a small thing. I noticed several of them giving me looks that suggested they were calculating how quickly I would age. Some of them do not understand why I would choose someone mortal. And you? I understand perfectly. You are brilliant, brave, and you make me want to be better than I have been. Mortality has nothing to do with it." Wren leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "What happens now, after the legal action against House Theron? We rebuild, open the archives, work to repair some of the damage the war has caused." He paused, "And I hope we do it together. I'd like that." They stood in the garden until the stars began to fade, talking about plans and possibilities in the future they were building from the ruins of a war that should never have been. The legal action against House Theron took 18 months and involved testimony from both House Ismail and House Dragon, as well as evidence that Wren continued to gather from archives across Europe. The case was heard by a coalition of neutral vampire houses and human legal experts, and it resulted in House Theron being dissolved, its assets seized and distributed to the families, both human and vampire, who had suffered from the war it had engineered. The 3 surviving members of House Theron's leadership were sentenced to imprisonment under conditions that Wren did not ask about, and Rhydion did not volunteer. Justice, he said, had been served. That was enough. During those 18 months, Wren moved into the Historical Society, taking over a suite of rooms on the 3rd floor that Rhydion had renovated for her. She continued her work on the archives, expanding the project to include not just the war records, but the full history of both houses. It was work that would take decades, possibly centuries, and she loved every moment of it. She and Rhydion navigated the complications of their relationship with more grace than she had expected. He was careful with her, conscious of his strength and her fragility. She was patient with him, understanding that 400 years of habit did not change overnight. They argued occasionally, usually about research methods or historical interpretation, and they learned to apologize and compromise and love each other's stubbornness. On the second anniversary of the treaty, Wren made her decision. She told Rhydion over dinner in his private quarters, a quiet meal that had become their routine. "I want to turn," she said. "Not because I'm afraid of aging or dying, because I want to finish the work we've started, and I want to do it with you, for as long as it takes." Rhydion set down his wine glass carefully. "You are certain?" "I've spent 2 years thinking about it. I'm certain. There is no going back. Once it is done. I know. I've read the medical literature, consulted with turned vampires, talked to your physicians. I understand what I'm choosing." "And your family?" Wren's smile was bittersweet. "I'm the last of my line. There's no one left to mourn the choice. But I think my ancestors would approve. They spent generations keeping records because they believed it mattered. I'm just continuing the tradition on a longer time scale." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I will not lie and tell you it is easy. The turning is painful, and the adjustment takes time. But I will be with you through all of it. I know. When? Whenever you think is right." They chose the autumn equinox, a date that had no particular significance except that Wren liked the symmetry. Rhydion arranged everything with the meticulous care he brought to all things that mattered, consulting physicians and ensuring that the process would be as safe and controlled as possible. The turning itself was as painful as promised. 3 days of fever and transformation that Wren endured in Rhydion's private quarters with him beside her the entire time. When she woke on the 4th day, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer, and she could hear Rhydion's heartbeat slow and steady from across the room. "Welcome back," he said softly. Wren sat up carefully, testing her new strength. "How do I look?" "Beautiful, though your hair has gone white." She touched it, found the strands pale as moonlight. "Like yours." "Like mine," he agreed and smiled. The adjustment was strange and difficult and occasionally frustrating, but Wren adapted with the same methodical approach she brought to research. She learned to control her strength, to manage the thirst, to navigate a world that moved differently than she remembered. Rhydion taught her, patient and thorough, and the other members of House Ismail helped in their own ways. 5 years after the treaty, Rhydion and Wren stood in the rebuilt cathedral, no longer bombed, no longer buried, but restored and opened as the archive of remembrance. The walls were lined with names, 11,140 of them, carved in stone, the human dead of a war that had finally ended. At the center of the nave stood a statue of a young man, commissioned by both House Ismail and House Dragon. Alexander Kane, aged 24, the mortal ward whose death had been weaponized into 2 centuries of conflict. The plaque at the statue's base read, "Remembered not for how he died, but for who he was. May we learn to question what we are told and honor truth above vengeance." The dedication ceremony was attended by members of both houses, human dignitaries, and vampire representatives from across Europe. Wren stood beside Rhydion at the front, their hands clasped, and watched as Corvus and Rhydion jointly unveiled the statue. "This archive is dedicated to remembrance," Rhydion said, his voice carrying through the restored space. "To the humans who died in a war they did not start, and the truth that ended it. May we never forget the cost of unquestioned certainty." The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, 11,000 seconds, one for each name on the wall. It took 3 hours, and no one left. They stood together, vampire and human, former enemies and new allies, and remembered. Afterward, as the guests filtered out, Wren and Rhydion remained in the cathedral, standing before the wall of names. "Do you regret it?" Rhydion asked quietly. "The turning, giving up your mortal life?" Wren leaned into him, solid and constant and hers. "No. I regret that it took a war to bring us together, but I don't regret the choice. We have centuries ahead of us. What will we do with them? Finish the archives, document the histories no one else will, maybe prevent the next war before it starts." She smiled up at him. "And I'd like to travel. See the places where history happened. I would like that too. They left the cathedral hand in hand, stepping out into the evening. Above them, the city glittered with electric light, a modern world built on top of ancient foundations. Wren thought about the path that had brought her here, the ledgers, the tears, the decision to count when no one else would. She thought about Rhydion, who had been willing to question 200 years of certainty because a mortal woman had wept. And she thought about the future they had built together, one name, one truth, one choice at a time. The war was over, the accounting was complete, and the story, she thought, was just beginning. They walked into the night together, two archivists with eternity ahead of them and work worth doing, and the city lights guided them home.